Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Fauci. You have undoubtedly become one of the most important and reliable figures in Washington amid this coronavirus pandemic that has changed our world. First and foremost, how are you doing during these chaotic times?
Well, you're right. It is really very challenging times. I'm doing fine, but it's a very exhausting process because we've been at this now for, over 2 months, and with the responsibilities of trying to get all the information, monitoring what's going on not only in our own country but throughout the rest of the world, being on the task force every single day, including Saturday and Sunday, and trying to be able to report accurately so that the administration, the president, can report to the country. This is a 20-hour-a-day job. So, I feel good. I'm exhausted, but I'm going on adrenaline, let's say that.
Well, we thank you for your service, and we have to ask you what is on everybody's mind. How much longer will this emergency last?
It's really impossible to make a definitive prediction on that because there are two dynamic processes that are going on, at least in this country. You have the natural escalation of the virus, which you see every single day. There's many more cases throughout the country, particularly in certain hotspot areas, such as New York City and California and Washington State. And at the same time that that's going on, our efforts to dampen it, which we call mitigation, to kind of separate people so that they don't spread the virus, those two things are sort of interdigitating with each other. And when that happens, it's going to really depend on what the efficacy and the efficiency and the success of our mitigation. Usually, if you look at what happened in China, what happened in South Korea, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to the outbreak. In China right now, there are very few new cases. What will happen when people return to their normal living, whether we'll see a secondary spike, we don't know. But their whole process took about 8 weeks or so. It's tough to say since we've had a good head start, unlike China, because we blocked the influx of cases from China and from Europe into our own country. But nonetheless, we still have an evolving outbreak in our own country. So for sure, it's going to be a matter of several weeks. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not going to end next week. No chance of that happening. We're still going to see an escalation, and to predict when it's going to turn the corner and come down, again, is something that would be very, very dangerous to give any definitive. But I would say it would at least be several weeks.
And in your opinion, is it time for the federal government to mandate a quarantine nationwide like other governments have already done?
Well, you have to strike a delicate balance between locking down an entire country, which could have secondary consequences on people's health, their ability to get supplies and things like that, balanced against the fact that you don't want to let the infection spread very widely and more vigorously than it already is. One of the things I think would be important is that there's a baseline set of mitigation recommendations, and we published them and spoken about them. Get the elderly and those who have underlying serious medical conditions and isolate them out of society. Don't socially isolate them, but physically isolate them. Then, telework if you can. Don't go to crowded places, bars, restaurants, theaters, places where people congregate. Try as best as possible to physically separate. Everybody in the country should be doing that now, no matter where you live. But in those areas where you're having an accelerated activity, particularly New York City and New Rochelle, Washington State, California, then you've got to be very aggressive in your mitigation. And the governors of those states have done that. Governor Newsom has essentially shut down California. Governor Cuomo, I think, very appropriately said, only essential workers go to work. Everybody else stay home. Whether or not you should be doing that at every single location, town, city, or what have you in the country, I think we have to monitor on a day-by-day basis because we want to have a balance of doing the right thing and being ahead of the curve aggressively with public health without causing, by shutdown, the inability to do things that might endanger people's health. That's really the balance you have to keep evaluating every single day.
Of course, and Dr. Fauci, more and more doctors and nurses are getting sick because of the lack of protective gear. Governor Pritzker of Illinois has even said that the states are essentially competing to get equipment for their hospitals. Should the federal government step in?
Well, the federal government has stepped in by getting FEMA involved. Right now, if you're listening, for example, to the press conference yesterday from the White House, what the theme is to allow the local people, the governors, to be able to negotiate with the private sector to get what they want. And I'd admit, often, they're not successful. When that happens, then you've got to get the federal government to help out. And they could help out by getting the private sector to make available more readily and in greater abundance personal protective equipment, masks, and even ventilators that the hospitals might need. Because you're absolutely correct. If we get a situation the way it is in Italy, where because of the lack of personal protective equipment, our healthcare workers are going to be in danger of getting infected. And that's very bad, not only from the standpoint of the individual health of the healthcare workers, but when they go out of action and can't take care of people, it becomes dreadful and desperate for the people who are infected. So you're making a very good point. We have got to get a whole influx of the equipment that these people need, and they're working on it right now. I mean, companies are stepping to the plate and saying they're going to be making millions and millions of copies of these personal protective equipment. Hopefully, we're going to see that not soon, but now.
And we've talked a lot about the face masks. Should the general public wear them? Do they actually protect people?
No, actually, that is a very good point, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Face masks predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly, for a person who is infected or who thinks they're infected to prevent them from infecting someone else. The most important use of a face mask is for a healthcare worker who's putting him or herself in harm's way by trying to take care of a person who's infected with coronavirus. Those are the people. To have people in the street, it may or may not provide some minor degree of protection. You can't guarantee it. But those are not the ones that should be walking around with a face mask. If we had an unlimited amount of face masks, so that we had trillions of face masks, then anybody who wanted to put a face mask on would put a face mask on. But when you need it for the healthcare workers and for the people who are infected, you've got to make sure that the people who need them are the ones who are appropriately using them.
And we've heard many experts talk about how this will not truly be over until there's a vaccine. How close are we to obtaining one?
No, that's not the case. It will not naturally be over until we get a vaccine. Public health measures can put an end to this and control it well if we implement those public health measures by mitigation and doing the kind of physical separation that is highly recommended by the guidelines from the task force and the president. We will get a vaccine in a year to a year and a half. A vaccine will be relevant and will be effective for what might happen, namely that this will disappear, not disappear, but go way down as we get into the summer and the early fall, but then it might recycle as a seasonal situation, the same way that we see with the flu. If that happens, then we'll be faced periodically on a seasonal basis with it. That's when a vaccine is going to be relevant. But for today, next week, next month, the next couple of months, it's not going to be a vaccine that's going to stop this. It's going to be very aggressive public health measures.
And talking about that social distancing, we've seen that many young people are not heeding the warnings to stay in place, to stay inside. How concerning is this, and why are more young people being affected by this virus in the U.S. than in China, for example?
Well, a couple of questions there, and I'll answer them separately. I mean, I think it's really very unfortunate that many people, predominantly young people, are disregarding the strong recommendation of social and physical distancing. I mean, you see pictures and videos of people, particularly in Florida and other places where the weather is warm, out on the beach, in bars, in restaurants, celebrating. I mean, we understand the need to do that. The trouble is that young people, generally, I know I felt that way when I was young, felt that you're invulnerable. Well, A, you're not invulnerable because we're starting to see now that even younger people than were reported in China are getting infected. I mean, obviously, the burden and the bulk of the suffering, the morbidity, the mortality among the elderly and those with serious medical conditions. But young people are not completely exempt from getting into trouble. That's one thing. The second thing is that you may inadvertently, even though you don't get a serious illness from the virus, you may inadvertently, just excuse me. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Let me start again.
I hope that wasn't the president.
No. The trouble is that inadvertently, younger people may, even though they feel that they're not going to be in danger of getting seriously infected, they can be carriers of infection. And what they might do is that they may get infected, have very few symptoms and maybe no symptoms, and then wind up inadvertently transmitting it to their elderly grandmother, grandfather, sick brother or sister, compromised uncle or someone. So you've got to be careful. You not only have a responsibility to yourself, you have a responsibility to society, particularly those people who you love and care for, you might be infecting. So young people really have got to snap to it. This is serious business. It is not a time to be out frolicking on the beach and in a bar. There will be time for that later. And when the time comes, go back, have fun, enjoy it, but not now.
Time to be at home. And I want to ask you, many Latino families are of mixed status, meaning one or more is undocumented, and many are terrified of going to get tested. What do you say to them specifically, and what are the consequences of not being able to generate trust within the immigrant community?
Well, you know, if you look at the White House briefings, particularly from individuals who represent the Department of Homeland Security and the Border Protection and other agencies, that they're making it very clear that they will not be enforcing any kind of immigration issues when it comes to people who are here in the country, living here, feeling they need to get a test, feeling they need to get a doctor, that they should put that worry aside. They're not going to be targeted for that.
And we also have to mention that there are over 1 million Latinos working in fields across the nation, picking fruits and vegetables in rural areas that are already underserved. What is the government doing to address this issue and make sure they have resources?
Well, you know, FEMA and the local authorities are realizing that not everybody has equal access to these kinds of things. They're trying to reach out at the community level to make accessible to these individuals the kind of testing as well as the care that would be associated if they turn out to be positive. So it's not an easy thing, it's a challenge, but the authorities are aware of that and trying to mitigate that.
And some personal questions, if you don't mind. Are you afraid in this moment?
You know, I've been doing this all my life. I've been dealing over the last 35, 7 years with HIV/AIDS, with Ebola, with the anthrax crisis, with Zika, with all of these things. So I wouldn't say I'm afraid. I don't get afraid of infections, infectious diseases. That's my life. That's my job. That's what I decided I want to do. So, A, I'm not afraid, but B, I'm very, very committed to try and mitigate this and stop it the way we did with HIV early on in the early years, the way we did with Ebola. This will come to an end, but it will depend on how vigorously we put our effort into it. So no, I'm not afraid. I'm committed.
So I would assume also that you are optimistic in the situation.
You know, I'm optimistic in the sense that it will end for sure. But, you know, there's going to be suffering, and there's going to be death, and there's going to be a lot of things that are very uncomfortable and difficult for people. It's not going to be an easy thing. We can do the best we can to be able to soften or modify the full impact of this. But we're dealing with an unprecedented, historic, very difficult situation. I don't want to scare people. I think they should take the energy that might go into fear and anxiety and put that energy into doing something about it. Keep yourself safe. Keep your family safe. Stay out of physical interaction for the time being. Hunker down. This will pass. This will end. But we've got to do whatever we can to make sure it doesn't do as much damage as it potentially can.
So important, patience is necessary. And after a long and hectic day, like the ones that you've been having lately, what do you do to relax when you get home?
I wish I could tell you that, but I don't. I don't have time to relax. By the time I get back, I have to squeeze in 3 to 4 hours of sleep. And the only thing I need to do is to just try and get to sleep, because otherwise the next day I'm going to be going on fumes, and that's no good for anybody. It's no good for me, and it's no good for my effort.
And one very last question. Do you speak any Spanish? ¿Habla español?
No, I feel ashamed because my daughters, who are not, I'm from Italian American background, not a Latino background, but my daughters speak Spanish, and I'm a dummy. I didn't learn it in school, and unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to learn it. But it's such an important language. If I had to do it over again, obviously, given the demography of our country, if I had one language that I would like to learn, certainly would be Spanish.
Well, it's never too late. I hope you watch us more often on Telemundo and learn a little bit more like that.
I'll try.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Casos en todo el país se dispara y de forma astronómica. Según datos de la Universidad Johns Hopkins, el número de infectados hoy supera los 11,000.